Before we begin our reading of the Odyssey, we need to know about some critical events that happened after the Iliad, but before the Odyssey begins. Homer assumes that we know these events, and they set us up for the Odyssey's great beginning. Now, the first work, a minor epic that we need to know about, is called the Aethiopus. Sounds a bit like Ethiopia. It's the Aethiopus, and 5 books long. And it actually talks about the death of Achilles. Remember, the death of Achilles is something that we were aware of, constantly kind of hovering over the Iliad, but it's not in the Iliad. Homer looks not forward to it, but looks ahead to it. He anticipates it. Achilles, of course, is aware of it. But the actual death of Achilles is described in the Aethiopus. And what happens is that Achilles is targeted by Paris. So think of it. It's kind of a revenge of Paris, if you will. And here's Paris, not known to be a great fighter, but nevertheless a pretty good archer. And Paris spots Achilles, and he shoots him with an arrow through the heel, killing him. Now, that shooting of Achilles through the heel is probably the source of a later idea, which is that somehow Achilles was invulnerable. He could not die except if he was shot through the heel. If he was shot anywhere else, he would not die. This idea is nowhere present either in the Iliad or the Odyssey. As I mentioned before, it somewhat contradicts the Iliad because in no way does Achilles assume. Achilles actually puts on this elaborate armor carved for him by the god Hephaestus. Obviously, he wouldn't need it. He'd only need a little anklet if he felt, I'm only vulnerable on my heel. No. Nevertheless, the death of Achilles, the funeral of Achilles, described in the Aethiopus. Now, then we go to the Little Iliad. And the Little Iliad describes 2 important events, the suicide of Ajax, or Aias the Elder. Notice that Aias the Elder was the second greatest fighter after Achilles. But what happened is after Achilles' death, the Greeks decided to give Achilles' armor to someone. And everybody wanted it because it's fantastic armor. It was carved by a god himself. And the main finalists, if you will, for the armor were Ajax, or Aias, on the one hand, and Odysseus on the other. And the Greeks decided by vote to give the armor to Odysseus. And by doing so, they seem to have concluded that they valued Odysseus's cunning and wiliness over Aias's prowess in battle. Aias was unmistakably the second greatest, man in combat. But Odysseus is known to be kind of a strategist and a thinker, and we're going to see this character of Odysseus developed very well in the Odyssey. But Ajax, or Aias, was so insulted, so degraded, so angry that the Greeks gave the armor to Odysseus that he committed suicide. That's described in the Little Iliad. The other incident that's described in the Little Iliad is the actual fall of Troy. And the fall of Troy, of course, was the result of none other than Odysseus's crafty scheme. This is the famous scheme of the Trojan horse, a sort of pretend gift for the Trojans. They think that it's some kind of omen, almost a gift from the gods. They drag the horse into the city. The horse, of course, is pregnant or full with armed Greeks who come out of the horse at night. They're now on the inside of Troy. They can open the gates to Troy. They let in the Greek troops, and this is really how the sack of Troy occurs. So you have the sack of Troy described in the Little Iliad and the fall of Troy. And then we have another epic called the Ilium Perseus. And this describes the outrages that the Greeks committed during the sack of Troy. Now, this is very important because the Greeks did things that go beyond the normal course of battle. Of course, you're allowed to fight, you're allowed to kill your enemy, but still there are conditions and there are circumstances. So Achilles' son, a guy named Neoptolemus, kills King Priam at his family altar. Now, it's one thing to kill King Priam, but to kill him at the family altar where he is, in a sense, seeking protection from a god, this is a little bit out of bounds. The Greeks also grabbed Hector's son, Astyanax, and fling him from the battlements of Troy to his death. This is exceptionally brutal. The Greeks also rape Cassandra, who is Priam's daughter. The rape is conducted by another Aias. Now, not Aias the elder, but Aias the younger. And what he does is he rapes Cassandra in the temple of the virgin goddess Athena. This is a sacrilege on all kinds of levels. Athena is a virgin goddess. The rape occurs in the temple. And so the gods are angered by these offenses by the Greeks. And their punishment that they decree is that the Greeks are going to have a lot of trouble on their way home. And sure enough, they do. Agamemnon gets home. He does make it home. Takes him years to get home. But once he gets home, he is murdered by his own wife, Clytemnestra, and a man that she has taken up with named Aegisthus. This, by the way, is described in famous Greek tragedies. But Menelaus and Helen get home, but it takes them 7 years of wandering. They get lost. They go to Egypt. They finally make it home, but only in the 8th year after the war. Aias the Lesser, this is the guy who rapes Cassandra. He doesn't make it home. He gets killed at sea. And for the gods, this is an appropriate recompense for his sacrilegious rape in the temple of Athena. So as the Odyssey begins, Homer wants you to know that all these Greek heroes have had a lot of trouble. Some of them have not made it home. Some of them have. But as the Odyssey begins, only Odysseus is still missing. Only Odysseus is still out there somewhere. And his hometown of Ithaca is, as we will find out, in a real mess because of the absence of its lawful ruler.